What's up guys, Tauredian here with a quick GDevelop tutorial. In this tutorial we will be showing how to make multiple instances of one object follow multiple instances of another object. What do I mean by that? Well, if we go ahead and hit preview, we'll see that each one of these blue circles has its own red square that follows it around wherever it moves. If you've tried this yourself, you may have run into a problem where all of the red squares will follow a single blue circle, so these other ones wouldn't have one. And that's what we're going to be showing how to fix today. So the first step to this is giving each one of these objects an object variable of ID. So we'll go into the object variables. We'll see that it has an object variable called ID. It's a number, and we're going to set that to 0 for now. And we're going to do the same thing to the followed object, the object being followed. Go into its object variables, give it an ID variable, a number, and we're going to make that one 0 as well. And then if we head on over into the events, we'll see how the magic happens. And it's just this one condition in action. It's really simple. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make an event that repeats for each instance of the followed object, and it looks at the follower's object ID and sees if it's the same as the followed.id, the object variable ID in the followed object. And what this is doing is it's selecting the follower with the same ID as the followed object and then applying whatever is over here. And over here we just have it changing its follower position to the position of the followed object. And okay, so that's all well and good, nice and simple, but if we just leave it at that, it's not going to work right. So we'll have to go into our scene, and you'll see here, if we click on this, down in the instance variables, you'll see it has that object variable ID, and this one is set to 0, and this circle is also set to 0, so these two will be paired. And if we click on this one's set to 1, and this one's set to 1, so those two will be paired. And this one's set to 2, and this one is set to 2, and those two will be paired. So all this event does is it takes objects with the same ID and puts the follower object at the followed object's position. So we'll go ahead and preview this again, and you'll see each one of these, and if I mouse over it, the text object next to the mouse shows us the ID of the objects that we're mousing over. So you'll see these both are 2, these both are 1, and these both are 0, and that's how it knows to pair them up. So that's nice and simple, but what if for your game you don't want to manually drag in everything, manually set its ID? Let's make this one 4 and this one 4. I think we skipped a number, but you get the point. Okay, that can be tedious. So how do we do this on the fly? Well, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go into the global variables or scene variables, but I'm just going to use a global variable for this. And we're going to make a variable called current ID. We're going to make that a number, and we're going to set that to start at 0. Later on we might change this, and I'll explain why we might do that, but for now we're going to start it at 0. And if we go back into our events and we look under create objects when clicked, boom, okay, so now we have event sheet logic for every time we click and release the left mouse button, it's going to create a follower object, and it's going to create a followed object at the mouse cursor. But what it's also going to do when it's creating these objects is it's going to change the ID of follower and followed and set it to the current ID variable. That's that variable we made here. So what it's going to do is it's going to create those objects and set its object variable ID to the global variable current ID, so whatever number we have here. And then, this is very important, after we create and assign the ID, after we create the objects and assign them IDs, we are going to want to increment the global current ID variable by 1. So we're going to add 1 to it. What does that mean? Okay, well, if we go back into our project and we click, we'll see this number in the top left. This is our current ID variable, our global variable called current ID. And every time we click, it goes up by 1. but it's doing that after we create the objects and assign them an ID. So if we mouse over this, we'll notice this one is 4, this one is 3, this one is 2, this one is 1, and this one is 0, because that's what we started at. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 5. And why would we want to start this at 5? Well, if we go back into our scene here and we click, you'll notice this first one we made is now ID number 5, and you'll see that no matter how many we make, they'll all follow each other around and we can make them on the fly, but you'll notice that it started at 5. Why would we want to start it at 5? Well, in your game you might want to mix manually placing, let's say this is an enemy that's like, let's say this is like a tank, right? And the square is like the body and the circle is the turret, or vice versa. I think I have that mixed up, but whatever. You want a turret to follow a tank object. Well, you might want to, in the scene, manually place some enemies, but then also call in other enemies on the fly later. So how would we do that? Well, let's go to these manual ones. That one's a 0, that one's a 0. We're going to start these at... No, we're going to start them at 0. So that one's good. Let's change this one to 1. And change this one to 2. And this is just the same thing we did earlier where we were manually placing them. Let's preview to make sure it works. Okay, these work perfectly. But what if we want to spawn in more enemies on the fly and have some that we place manually? Well, if we had this at 0 and we click, you'll see that it will conflict with the one that we placed manually, because both of these are ID 0 now. So it basically stole that one's ID. How do we change this? Well, we have 3 here starting at 0, so we have 0, 1, and 2. If we don't want it to conflict, all we got to do is go into our global variables and start this at 3. And now if we preview and we click, you'll notice this one's ID is 3, it incremented to 4, and all of these are coexisting peacefully without stealing each other's red boxes, and everything works out perfectly.